Mike McCool here. I'm in the Royal Examiner studio, and with me today is Dr. Tripp Brad. Everybody, I think, in Front Royal knows Dr. Brad. He's gone through a lot here in the last couple of years, and we're just glad that he can get into the studio. And we're going to talk a little bit about his journey to where he's at today, but we're going to talk about his practice, which is still open and going strong, and some of the technological things he's done that other places they haven't embraced yet. So I think you're a pioneer on that. And also at the end, we'll talk a little bit about this coronavirus. So Dr. Brad, kind of bring us up to date on your journey through your your medical dilemmas that you've had.
Well, back in 2017, I was diagnosed with myelodysplastic syndrome, which is really, if you will, a leukemia that's confined to the bones. And, I realized when we moved into our, we quote, downsized, I really didn't help with any of the moving because I just ached and felt terrible the whole time.
Right.
And so my dear wife said, you go in and get checked. And sure enough, after a bone marrow biopsy, we had the diagnosis. And through a series of processes, back now in 2018, I became a candidate for stem cell transplant. That's not bone marrow transplant, it's a different type of thing. And as it turned out, my daughter Erica ended up being the best match. And she donated her stem cells. And as they say, sometimes your new life begins with the transplant. But on April 10th, 2018, I got the transplant. It has been a very, very, very rocky road. And so as I think I've alluded to in the past with others, I've had so many complications that the folks at Johns Hopkins, where I go, has been sort of amazed that I've survived, and they said I'm kind of the poster child for complications. As I mentioned to you, I've kind of been overdrawn at the Cat Life Bank for some time, coming to the edge many times. And but one of the things I decided to do, a lot of people keep their private health affairs private. And after watching different doctors sort of navigate that challenge, I decided to create a blog. And it's trippbrad.blogspot.com. And it allowed people to really kind of help know what was going on, because at the time of the diagnosis, patients were coming in and saying, I heard you had prostate cancer. I heard you had colon cancer. I heard you had, I'm going, okay, this is good.
I'd be glad to have those things.
Well, yeah. But I would say that this has really helped reduce some of the angst that some of the patients have had. And obviously, we really wanted to sort of give our patients a chance to know what was going on so they didn't get very anxious and want to move on to other practices and stuff, which sometimes happens. And so it's worked out quite well. And thankfully, I have been very, very, very humbled by this community. From halftime basketball games, shootouts that actually have contributed to helping me pay this. It's probably the cost will end up being about $1.2 to $1.4 million. And I'm, in this area, doctors really aren't, quote, rich.
Oh, yes, right.
They work hard for their money and taking care of patients.
And insurance doesn't pay for everything, does it?
Well, yeah. For about 3 months, Medicare said that they didn't cover my hospitalization. I'm going, oh, man. But like I said, and then we actually even set up a GoFundMe site. So it's really been helpful through that whole process. And I've had a lot of complications. One of those complications is the graft versus host disease, which is where Erica's stem cells actually attack me. And if you see me squinting, it's because my eyes are one of the end organs that get affected. I've had other ones too, but I want to go back to the absolute overwhelming response of this community. And, people will come up to me in stores and want to pray with me.
Right.
And I happily welcome that.
We've had you on our prayer list for quite a while.
Yeah. And I'm here today to tell you that works.
Yes. I know that you're one of the few physicians I know that embrace their religion and embrace prayer. I mean, you'll pray with patients. I know you've done that in the past.
Well,
before you got sick, you did it.
Well, patients, we're all comprised of 3 different processes: physical, emotional, and spiritual. And when people can tap into the spiritual personally themselves, they do better. And studies have shown that. And so I'm really just practicing good medicine.
Sure.
Really, but, sometimes it's a kind of, so we don't ever proselytize. We always do it with the patient's permission. But
Sure.
When the time is right, it's been amazing to see people open up and actually accept that process. And so that's been and so, it's been just overwhelming. And of course, now I'm back in the office and I'm seeing patients a little bit. I've had a pneumonia for 10 months. It's a type of bacteria called Pseudomonas that isn't infectious to the community, but it's a common bacteria that gets people who are immunocompromised. So it's been quite a struggle, but it's just like Jan and I came up with a credo: it is what it is. And as we've moved from one challenge to another, it is what it is. And
This too shall pass.
Well, hopefully. I've had conversations with the good man above, and I think I've come to the realization that he wants me to stay around. Otherwise, I wouldn't still be here, because I've had many opportunities to cross over. But in view of that, then I have gifts yet to give to the community, and so that's my...
Well, there's that thought that doctors never get sick, that they have this magic drug they can take. You never see them with a cold. You never see them with anything. They're always a peak of health.
We put on our pants the same way as everybody else.
So there's no magic pill somewhere, right?
I wish we did. Oh, my lands. I have another colleague who's suffering from cancer right now in our community, and it's sad that we have to go through that, but and that's part of the blog thing. Is maybe and one of the things I said, in fact, in front of my church was, if someone comes to Christ as a result of this process, then it was worth it all. And I'm happy to report, at least from what I can tell, many have come into Christ. Not because of me, of course, but the Holy Spirit. And so, really, that's one of the blessings that I kind of lean on when I'm feeling kind of crappy.
You never thought this would be an evangelistic tool, did you?
Well, our best mission field's in our own backyard.
Right, exactly.
I think, and I really, really appreciate and honor people who go to exotic places to do missionary work. But really, we have plenty of people who need to know more about their faith and sort of explore that. And it's right here in Front Royal, so in the Winchester area. So it's been. In fact, I had a couple of physicians who actually came to Johns Hopkins from this area to learn more about that. And so, sitting there on my bed, I was sick as HELL, but I was willing to share because it was certainly worth that for them. And so here I am, and I'm slowly coming back, and I still have a PICC line here, which is a line, an IV line that goes, right just above my heart, so I can get antibiotics and
not sticking you with that needle all the time.
Oh, that's been a blessing. Anyone who's had a PICC line has probably, PICC is how it's spelled, but has been grateful not to be stuck like a,
Yeah.
So many
Been
times.
there, done that many times, right?
Oh yeah. So it's I'm making a comeback, but if by micron I make the thing, So we're coming along.
Well, that's great, great. So your practice is open. You've had some great nurse practitioners there helping you out.
Yes.
And of course, your lovely wife, Jan, is your head nurse. She's still in the office?
She is my social glue. She's the at the office, and we hired 2 nurse practitioners, and of course, actually one of them had to leave because they were so far away from home to commute, and we're happy to have Danya Finnerfrock, otherwise known as Danya Rinker, when she was in high school. She grew up here. She's a very talented and intelligent nurse practitioner who's worked in various other offices, and so we're happy to have some of our homegrown come back.
That's great.
And we have another nurse practitioner that's coming. We're really kind of doing a lot of things, speaking of the practice, that are not done in a lot of other practices. So that's some of the things that we, which we really don't promote or advertise, but it's just good medicine.
Right. Well, that this nurse practitioner, physician assistant movement has really come forward in the last couple of years. Laws have changed, which allow physicians to utilize them a little more, and it's spilled over into the dental field as well. With their dental hygienists can do more work without the dentist standing over top of them.
Exactly.
And you've been a proponent of this telemedicine for a while. I recall you promoting that.
Well, we've been doing this since 2014. It's a marvelous tool, and that's what it is, to sort of take care of patients. For the patients, it reduces their what we call process time. From getting up, getting dressed, coming in, hopefully not waiting too long, seeing the doctor, checking out, and then they have to go to the pharmacy and then go there. So this can be a 4 to 5 hour ordeal.
Exactly.
Even more so for the elderly.
And a lot of time it's just a matter of seeing them and how they're doing and looking at them to...
Well, a good case in point, we had a patient that had multiple sclerosis. He really, he could get in to the office, but it was quite a process. I mean, they had to get an ambulance and everything else, and so we did a telehealth visit. And his wife had already recorded his blood pressure measurements. We actually had the local regional lab draw the blood work from his home. Mm-hmm. And, a picture's worth 1,000 words. Once we got connected, I was able to talk to him, and, they liked it because, again, they didn't have to go to great lengths to come in. This is a good example of that, and we were able to basically have an office visit in his home.
Yeah. And I think we're going to see more and more of that, especially with this coronavirus thing. We've shut the whole world down here, thinking that the isolation will help. You want to talk about that? What do you think? Your personal or your professional opinion?
Well, it's been an interesting study in social culture, for sure. When the coronavirus or the COVID-19 was becoming a possible threat, a lot of doctors' offices had already sort of figured out ways to take care of this and how to handle their patients and test and all these things, screen and everything else. And then, as what usually happens, the bigger, slower-moving bureaucratic, entities like, not that they're bad, I mean, like Valley Health Systems, our local health system, finally came out with their plans, which kind of rolled over ours. And then the Virginia Department of Health and the Commonwealth of Virginia rolled over that. And now we have the federal response, which is, none of it's bad. It's just, the trouble with that is it just rolled over all those plans. It'd be nice to have some congruity with all that. But, that's what's going to happen with something like this. It's just unsurpassed in how it's affected and crossed across so many different social strata and in the medical community. But I agree with, and some people may or may not like the idea that we closed the borders back in January to China, but that was one of the it was almost courageous decision, if you want to call it that, because it was risky from a political perspective, but it actually it probably will end up saving thousands of lives. And so, it's kind of like that old Visa commercial, one life, there's no cost to that. So,
Right.
We're going to save lives as a result of that decision. And of course, as Dr. Fauci has said, we're trying to flatten that curve of people who get it. By doing that, it will reduce resource use, including, downstream hospital care and ICUs and ventilators and all those things. And, as much as we don't like the idea of social distancing, which is what it's called, it's really true. I mean, if the closer you are to somebody, the 6 feet thing is actually been proven with influenza and time of exposure,
Right.
Proximity. So, it's been a gradual ramp up, and I think that's been one of our challenges at our office. We actually we don't have a reception area in our office. We actually have our reception area actually is our parking lot.
Oh, that's right. I heard you say something like, "We're going to come out to you."
Well, so what happens is they come in, sign in, go out to their car, and it's almost like some of the restaurants where you get called in after you've been out on the porch.
Give them little pagers. When it buzzes, they're going to come in.
Well, that'd be. I mean, if we thought about that, that'd have been cool. Some of the offices that across the United States that are in malls actually have that kind of thing. But we call them on their cell phone, tell them to come in, and we direct them directly into an exam room, so their exposure is virtually none to anybody else. And it's worked out. Patients have really appreciated that. And it's worked out quite well. And it allows medical care to keep going, in terms of taking care of patients. And of course, we put it on our app, some guidelines and some information. We have a smartphone app for
Everything's on your phone nowadays. It's like, if it's not on your phone, you don't need it.
Well, a long time. That's why I developed an app for our practice, because the computers moved to the smartphone.
Exactly.
And people use that for their email, for ordering things, and so we've created this resource that it's Skyline Family Practice is the name of the app, free. And actually, I've had some school people say, because we have some things about kids and videos and how to take care of teenagers, always a challenge, but it was so helpful that they said they thought about even making it available to everybody else. And I said, we don't care. It's a resource that's available. But with putting the coronavirus stuff, that's been one of the challenges, is that, if you turn on the TV, no matter what news feed you watch, there's always the expert who really gives you their idea of what should be done. And sometimes there's, it's not exactly matched up to what the Virginia Department of Health and the CDC recommend. So, so we decided, we put it in our app, and there it is. In fact, I'm about ready to roll out some screening questions so that people can decide if they need to be tested or not. So it's been a challenge for the individual offices, and some have closed. Some dental offices have just plain closed down.
What about the testing? How do you see that working here locally?
Well, it's an unknown thing. What should have happened, I was involved in rolled over by the federal government. I was involved in an early process where I was going to be one of the Virginia physicians who were going to okay the actual screening for various people, because, there are only so many tests that you can have and do, and you don't want to do it on somebody who's just worried, and they're very low risk. But the tests themselves are very accurate. They're sensitive in the sense that if you have it, you probably have it. And they're also pretty specific, which really means if they're negative, they're probably negative. Realizing that they're all false positives and negatives.
Sure.
the fact is it's going to take 2 or 3 days to get those results back, and how you funnel that result so the patient knows, and ideally their primary care physician knows, is going to be a real challenge. And of course, the epidemiologists at here in Virginia, and of course the CDC certainly want to know where people are popping up. But again, I'm hopeful that the curve will be flattened with this social distancing and cutting down on exposures. But
I think one of the things too that people aren't really quite sure of, there's a lot of, what do you call, it's just the flu, or it's not any worse, it's getting a cold, and we'll just treat it the same way. So can you kind of describe why are we doing all this so drastically?
COVID-19 or coronavirus is a new virus genetically, and so no one has immunity to it. As opposed to the influenza the influenza, it does mutate, year by year, and that's why you always got to go in every year to get shots, because you get 2 strains of the A and 2 strains of the B, because they're based on last year's, because that's the only way you can roll out the vaccine. But it usually gives you good protection. This year was, maybe 50%. But what the difference there is, and I'm sitting here today tell you that I got influenza A, but I got the vaccine, but I didn't end up in the hospital. I got sick, but I didn't get too sick. And so my immunity was good enough to keep me out of the hospital. And that's what a lot of people forget. With COVID-19, it's like, there are many other coronaviruses that actually cause cold symptoms. So, the classification of this virus is in that class. And so you'll get, for the average person, cold symptoms. But of course, people who have compromised immunity, which generally are people over 65, or some people say over 60, but over 65, who may have comorbid conditions like diabetes or, COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, or pneumonia, or something like that, or some other problems, will actually be at very high risk, because it's just another assault of their system they don't need. And, if you've watched the mortality statistics, it's usually the elderly that have been the ones that have died. So, and that's because we don't have any immunity to it. The little munchkins that run around, it's like they're little sacks of viruses, and they get their little sniffle and they're on their way. The trouble is they're also vectors, that is, they carry it around and can expose adults to it. And younger adults can do the same thing. They may get a little sick, even though they may finally self-quarantine. And the problem with many viruses is a day or two before they're actually symptomatic, they're actually infectious. So, and that's why the influenza vaccine has done so well over millennia, because, for 2 or 3 days before you actually get sick, you're spreading it. Of course, it wants to propagate itself. And that's exactly what COVID's doing too. And,
So will these be treated? So is the treatment similar to how we treat the flu?
Treatment is supportive, because we don't have an antiviral at this point that'll actually treat it, like Tamiflu. Tamiflu is the common one. There's another one that's a little more expensive for influenza. So it has to run its course, and we have to be there. The healthcare system has to be there to support that person through their illness. And you've heard about people being on ventilators because their lungs just basically get so bad they can't support themselves without some support. So, yeah.
So this isolation that we're going through, and this social isolation, how long do you think people will put up with that?
Another social experiment, right?
It is, because I don't recall ever having something done like this in our country. It's so
they can count their toilet paper rolls at home.
Well, yeah. What is the deal with this toilet paper? I mean, it doesn't give you a symptom of needing a lot of toilet paper. I'm just curious of why we have this shortage.
It's just how people are. And I don't know. If somehow that got out, and you can go anywhere and all the paper products are gone. You know,
Yeah, maybe someone put a meme on Facebook that says you'll need
Well,
toilet paper better.
it's probably a conspiracy by Georgia Pacific and some of the other paper companies to,
Yeah.
sell all their products. But
They
anyway,
did clear the shelf off. They cleared the pipeline out, though.
yeah.
That's for
So
sure.
it'll. And I appreciated what Vice President Pence said about just buy a week's worth of stuff. And some of the chains have actually restricted people from buying, walking out with 2 cartloads of paper products, so which is reasonable.
Yeah, I was at the store and I noticed a lot of the shelves were empty. People were buying, and I was looking at some of the esoterical type food items. They were even gone. People say, "Well, I'll try that," because that's the only thing left. And they were buying. I just thought, you got to be kidding me. I mean, then the recycling. I mean, the restocking process and our food chain. I mean, this is really tasking our system.
Well, and from a bigger perspective, this is probably a wake-up call to look at how our supply chain is so dependent upon another country, and I won't mention it, but everyone knows, and I'd like to see more labels that say "Made in the USA."
Right.
So it'll actually, hopefully, it'll be a wake-up call to realize that we're not as dependent. We don't need to be as dependent on other companies countries to the extent that we are.
Well, it's amazing. You can buy any fruit you want 7 days a week, 365 days a year, and we know it's not all grown in our country, but the supply chain is allowed to provide us with our berries and bananas and strawberries and all sorts of products like that. And vice versa, we're shipping it to them on the other side of the year. And it's amazing.
My grandfather grew up for his childhood in Saginaw, Michigan, in Hope, Michigan, actually, and they got snowed in one winter, and all they had to eat was rutabagas. And I thought,
they had that cooked 42 different ways, didn't they?
that would give me nightmares thinking about how I would live on that for 42 days. But I mean, they had a food, but they couldn't go out and buy star fruit or, black raspberries, which were grown in Argentina.
Right.
So it's just amazing that we've become so used to having so many things available to us very quickly. So.
Well, I think it'll be a social experiment, and I think that this will help us down the line when we do things like this, and we'll see how far we stretch it. But the thing is just kind of, this too shall pass. Remain calm. It's not the end of the world yet,
True.
And
True.
Don't overtask the system. I think that's the thing. We got to get into that routine. We're not overtasking our supply or our medical services.
Well,
every time right now, these ornamental pear trees are blooming. We had a little warm weather. If you drive down the street, their blooms and blossoms are everywhere. The leaves are coming out on the trees early, so your nose starts to run with the allergies. And I got COVID-19. So.
Oh well, right. And so that's been some of the challenges. And so basically, the information dust will settle to the point where we actually, in the next week or so, it'll all be, known what we're supposed to be doing, and it'll all be, there'll be a process. But this the pot of anxiety has been stirred to the max, and unfortunately, there have been a lot of people who have been just absolutely sucked into that whole process and very worried about it. But it's going to pass, and I think it'll be okay.
It looks like the Virginia Department of Health and the federal government, they are working on it actively. And of course, this is affecting our financial and our business as well. We got people that are, like today, the restaurants, limited to 10 patrons and takeout. And
I mean, the poor servers who depend on their tips. Well, if they don't have people to wait on,
sure,
I feel very badly for them. And of course, the federal government's trying to figure ways to help them financially.
Sure.
But that's beyond my knowledge of things. But I'm glad that the good thing about this is almost like World War II, we're all coming together to really fight a common foe. And if we look at it that way, I think we'll all be better people and better Americans as a result.
That's it. That's true. Well, Dr. Brad, I really appreciate you making an effort to come here today, because it was an effort for him to get into the studio.
Yeah.
And we appreciate it, and you're welcome back anytime, and
Absolutely.
maybe we can do this electronically next time. We'll do it.
Oh,
but,
no, that's right.
But things are open over at Skyline Practice, and
Sure.
and Dr. Brad and his staff is there to continue treating all of us here in Front Royal, Warren County. So
Yeah.
look him up and get his app, Skyline Family Practice. You can go to the Play Store.
Google Play, and well, we're getting that. It's redeployed now, and then the Apple Store, so you
Yeah.
can get that. And it's actually a pretty good,
pretty
good app, and in terms of information. So
Well, it's great. Well, keep that on your mind if you look. Are you accepting new patients?
we are indeed.
There you go. He's accepting new patients. So if you don't have a family practice, now be sure to look up Skyline Family Practice and Dr. Brad. He's been here a long time. I think I was probably one of your first patients when we walked through the door here. We won't say how long ago that was, but we all had hair.
The last century.
It was in the last century. Well, again, thanks again. I really appreciate it. And again, we'll keep you in our prayers.
Thank you very much.
Thanks you.
Thank you.